Good evening all and welcome. The question, are we alone in the universe, has been pondered many times, and tonight, I wonder if we can talk about it again. For I present to you a collection of stories about UFO sightings and maybe even possible sightings of otherworldly beings. I will let you decide what to believe, but be sure to let me know your thoughts down below. For now though, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was home on the computer in the middle of the 2000s in New Zealand, and then I looked out the window and saw a second sun. Like, there was the sun, and there was another one, a bit far away, but in the same place. I thought maybe I was not mentally okay and I was just seeing things, so I called my mum and siblings to check, and they all saw it. My mum is religious, so she thought it was the second coming of Christ and got all excited. I did not believe, so I was like, oh damn, are we gonna die? Is it a meteor, a bomb? The second sun started to get larger and change colours. It went all the colours of the rainbow and then disappeared. To this day I don't know what it was. My memory is hazy now, but I did remember the date for years and searched it incessantly. We lived in a rural town, so it wasn't on the news. The only thing I ever found that may have been slightly relevant was that Russia were doing nuclear tests at the time. But Russia is very far away from New Zealand. I wish I could remember more now. It would have been around 2006 or 7. May have been just a meteor burning up in the atmosphere, but damn it, it was the strangest thing I ever did see. My husband Paul is not a believer in the paranormal, the ghostly, or cryptids. I, on the other hand, love to read, watch videos, and hear stories of the eerie and supernatural that others have experienced or written about. Even though Paul is cynical and smirks at me when I attempt to interest him with a story or video that I think is compelling, he has had a few rather odd experiences. Here is one of them that occurred in early 1970. One day, Paul and his ex-wife Greta and a guy they knew called Bob took a drive far out in the desert in Bob's camper to drop some acid and explore an old ghost town called Tumco, just north of Yuma in Arizona. As they began to come onto the drug, Bob began to seem a bit strange, not dangerous or anything, but strange. Not normally as one would expect under the circumstances. They spread out a bit, each involved in their own trip, musing and interests. What was left of the town was basically old adobe foundations, of limited interest in their current condition. As he explored his surroundings, Paul walked up a rise above Tumco to see what might be there and for the view it would provide. As he created the rise, he came upon a graveyard and began to explore and read some of the gravestones. Of course, they were all from 1850 and 60, and eventually, he found himself standing at the end of a cowboy's grave, as he began musing about who had lived and died in this place, what their lives were like in this old mining town, and who this man may have been, and what might have been buried with him. With this thought, he began to develop a personality for the man who was buried here. He was a prominent man of Tumco who had made it big in mining. Therefore, he was a wealthy man, with property, nice clothes, good women, and probably had some expensive jewelry, maybe a ring of some value that was buried with him? What else could be there? What about the other graves? This train of thought led to, how long before it's okay to dig up a grave? How old does it have to be before no one cares? It's okay to dig up Egyptians, and at the time, it's okay to dig up Indians and people from the Middle Ages. It seems like it's been plenty long enough. 100 years, sure, why not? The graves are obvious in a state of neglect, so who would know, right? How long would it take? Could we do it in a few hours? But as he meandered down this avenue of thought, he got cold feet as he realized that probably the Victorians might still be a bit fresh, so maybe this wasn't such a great idea. The possibility of getting caught was too small, but still, the thought was intriguing. Finally, after some time, with his drug-induced daydreaming, he decided against grave robbing. He turned and began to walk away towards the camper to rejoin Greta and Bob. But just as he cleared the crest of the rise on his way back, thwack! From behind him, a cholla cactus ball slammed into the back of his lower right arm and stuck there. This was a bit of a shock to say the least. He immediately whirled around to see who the hell would do such a thing, but there was no one there. This left him feeling a bit perplexed, but although the thought crossed his mind that perhaps an angry ghost had tossed the cholla cactus ball at him for thinking of violating their graves, he dismissed it. He didn't believe in ghosts. He began rationalizing and decided maybe he had brushed up against one without realizing it. Then when he swung his arm back, he encountered it. However, there was still some cholla cacti in the vicinity. There were none anywhere close him though. A bit spooked, he pulled the painful cactus ball off his arm and proceeded back to the camper, followed by an eeriness that now seemed to cloak the town. But the strangeness did not end there. After rejoining Greta and Bob's strange vibes continued. Paul could not assess him or his motives at all. He was trying to figure out if maybe it was because Bob wanted to have more intimate relations with Greta, or maybe he was thinking of killing them. Why was he behaving so strangely? Bob continued to act strangely and a bit unpredictably, making everyone feel uncomfortable and wary. Finally, early in the evening, the decision was made to head back home. It was a long drive, so Greta climbed into the back of the camper, while Bob drove and Paul sat shotgun. The road was not paved and meandered along through the desert. As night fell, they were moving along slowly, still feeling a bit awkward, but things were beginning to mellow. As they rounded a bend into the road, they came upon a strange scene. At the side of the road, off about 50 yards or so, was, at best as Paul can describe, an eerie golden yellowish luminescent glowing craft. The glow seemed to surround us and at the same time was part of it. The craft was sitting on long legs, and there was a ramp dropped out from underneath with a couple of aliens in sort of whitish, sort of silverish suits. Bubble-headed, large, black-eyed, narrowed chins on the tall side. Aliens in strange silverish suits walking down the ramp out of this glowing craft thing to join another couple of aliens already standing on the ground outside of it. As they slowly drove by, there was a moment of silence and incredulity. Then Paul turned to Bob and asked, "Did you just see that?" Bob nervously answered, "Yes." However, as they turned back to look for a second look, the scene had completely changed. There was a roaring fire reflecting off the metal of an old white truck with a silver camper shell on the back. And sitting around that roaring campfire, drinking their cups, were a handful of desert rats dressed in khaki-colored clothes. You know, the type of old fogies depicted in old westerns that have been out in the desert hunting for buried treasure, whose clothes match the desert. Yeah, like that. According to Ross Coulthart, a famous Australian journalist, there is a reported by the US Department of Defense that whatever this alien phenomenon is, they are able to manipulate and alter human consciousness and perception. At any rate, they finally got home wondering to this day what in the hell they saw. So maybe, just maybe, they really did see aliens. Oh, and by the way, Bob never murdered them, and nothing ever happened between him and Greta either. About 8 years ago, I was in class at VWU, in a building on downtown campus overlooking the river. It was probably about 8:30 to 9 a.m., a clear day with the sun beginning to rise. I was seated near the front, and the projector and fluorescent classroom lights were rather bright, so to give my eyes a little break, I turned to look out the window. After a moment or two, an object appeared and slowly flew past it. I was looking straight at it and watched it for about 15 seconds as it passed the 2 sets of windows and then went out of sight. It was a football-shaped, brushed, metallic kind of thing. The gold light of the sunrise reflected off it, with no obvious wings, tail, propellers, or lights. It made no sound that I could tell, and appeared to be on a gradual descent. This was mid-lecture, and of course no one else noticed. The professor was a bit serious, and I couldn't scream out, "Oh my god, guys, look, a UFO!" I was dying, though, that no one else had seen it, because I wanted to go, "What the hell is that?" In any case, I never in a million years thought I would see a UFO. I had always leaned towards the feeling that people were making UFO stories up, or that they were imagining things. I have no idea what it was that I saw, other than being 100% sure that I saw it. I got such a good look at it. I was able to notice all the details, and this was pre-drones, but it also looked nothing like any drone I've ever seen since, and was definitely not an airplane. I live in outer Sunset in San Francisco, and at around 7 p.m. I poked my head out the window to see if it was raining. It wasn't. That's when I heard a loud aircraft overhead, which was several magnitudes louder than the planes that normally fly in my area. I looked to my left and saw a plane that appeared to be a commercial aircraft, but I noticed it was much larger and the lights were super bright and creating large cones of light ahead of it. I remember thinking how neat it looked, being able to see so much of the craft, an area around it lit up with such a cloudy evening. When I tried to focus in on it, the lights flickered off and I lost it completely. I could still hear it very loudly though. About 10 seconds went by and I see something come alight about 2 blocks to my right. I see a lot of commercial aircrafts out there, but this was easily 4 to 6 times larger in the sky than they normally appear. The lights were strange too. I saw what appeared to be 4 white jet exhausts, and across the whole craft there were blue and red lights in lines, now slowly glimmering. It moved much slower than regular planes, and was visible for about 10 seconds, moving north along the beach. It then vanished after about 10 seconds. Confused as hell, I looked around to see if anyone else had witnessed it. Lo and behold, someone on the corner of my street who was riding their bike had stopped and was gazing up at the sky in the same location as the craft. I shouted down to them, "Hey, did you see that? What was it?" They turned to look at me, back at the sky and then back at me, and without saying anything got on their bike and rode away. I could still hear the craft, so I got onto my roof and about half a minute or so later, I saw it come from behind me and slowly fly west out over the ocean until it just vanished. I stayed on my roof waiting to catch it again, but I didn't hear or see it after. Maybe about 20 minutes regular aircrafts began flying overhead as per usual. My best guess is that it may have been some sort of military aircraft, or perhaps several in a very tight formation. It's the loudest and largest aircraft I've ever seen. Thanks for nothing, dude on a bike. Or could it have been perhaps something otherworldly? This happened 7 years ago on the beach in eastern Massachusetts. Me, my brother, my cousin, and the girl I was with at the time were taking a long night walk along the beach, as we often did, to see the stars and such. Having very little light pollution at the edge of the continent affords us a spectacular view, much more impressive than any we could find near where we lived. We had found a nice spot sheltered by rocks to sit and soak up the sights when my cousin and I spotted something off near the horizon. It was a bright light, nothing more, blinking on and off at regular intervals. My cousin and I debated what it was for a minute or two, and I thought it could have been a lighthouse because it was over land. Eastham is on the bay side of the cape, which overlooked the entire inner ring of land. After surveying the surrounding lights from the buildings, etc., we decided it was too far and too high in the sky to be a lighthouse. The idea that it was an airplane crossed our minds, yet it was stationary. There was no noise coming from it. Although we may not have been able to hear it from several miles away, we didn't debate it for too long. It wasn't that interesting after all. There was nothing about it that said it wasn't something ordinary. So my cousin and I went back to chat with my brother and my girlfriend, who had been talking for a few yards. And now for the part I can't explain. As we were in the middle of some of our regular banter, The three of them froze, jaws to the ground, looking behind me, and look up at the same time, and I notice my back had gotten instantly warmer. Turning to follow their stunned gaze, I looked up. Behind where I was standing, and nearly 100 feet in the air, hung a luminous orb, suspended silently in the air. People with lesser powers of observation could have merely described it as a light in the sky. Yet I am here to tell you it was infinitely more interesting than that. It was no ordinary light. I'm willing to bet that almost anybody old enough to know the difference is able to tell what kind of light is being emitted by any device, natural or otherwise. Even when not directly facing the light, most of us would be able to discern the difference between light cast by an incandescent bulb and a halogen lamp, an LED, a laser, a TV set, the sun, the moon, fire, you get the picture. This light had a quality that I had never seen before or since in this life. One more time, with emphasis. This light was like nothing I have ever witnessed on Earth before. It was incredibly bright, but it didn't hurt to look at. Even though it was nighttime, it was bluish and gave off an energy that I could feel against my face, similar to the sun's rays. It looked liquid, almost alive, much like bioluminescence. Upon looking at it, all four of us certainly were stunned into silence as we looked at this object suspended above us and gawked. Finally, in my excitement and confusion, I lifted a finger and pointed at the sphere of light, asking, "What is that?" As on cue, this object did something even harder to describe. To put it simply, it just faded out, but that would be ludicrous considering just how it achieved this act. It moved silently in a straight line towards us above our heads, all the while fading from existence. It wasn't so simple as merely fading out like a dimmer switch on a kitchen light. It wrapped the darkness of space around itself and moved and became a shadow, where once it was light. Imagine taking a lit bulb and dragging it across the surface of a pool of black paint, slowly submerging it. Well, that's the best way I can describe it. Did it phase out into another dimension? Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. I'm just telling you what I saw. Once it had completely phased out, it did a loop and shot incredibly fast all the way back across the bay, where it continued to blink on and off at regular intervals. We sat and watched this for a while, now knowing for sure that it was something extraordinary. Eventually there were two, one would blink on, then the other one. This spectacle went on all night. I fell asleep, watching it out the window. They never came so close again, and in the years we went back to the beach we never saw anything like it again. Every time I go back I hope and pray to witness this thing again, promising myself that I will try to communicate instead of being completely flabbergasted. It was clear to me, and the rest of us present, that it was under the control of something intelligent. It wasn't very big, but it was big enough to fit one person in at least. I'll leave up to you to theorize what it could be. Let me preface this by stating that almost all of the encounters that I have witnessed have been with at least one other individual. The first two encounters happened on 2 consecutive days in 1997, and the numerous other encounters happened over the span of 90 days and a year and a half. I don't recall being abducted, but I have filled in reports with the incredibly incompetent MUFON. Back in 97, my buddy and I had just finished up our shifts at a pizza joint. It was 11 PM and we were worn out and wanted to get stoned. We were completely sober. We drove out into a cornfield in the off year, so it was full of rye. We were about half a mile off the road and it was pitch black, and because of our vantage point, I could see headlights in any direction for a good mile. We were way out in the country, so no worries. My buddy starts breaking up the weed, when I notice what I believe to be truck headlights shine directly from behind, take a hard left, and disappear. My buddy didn't seem to notice, but I became frantic because I thought it was the cops. My friend thinks I'm messing with him and continues breaking up some really terrible brick weed. I recall looking at the stars, and one star in particular grabbed my attention. I can't tell you why, but it looked like your average star. Within 30 seconds, this star starts moving up and down, side to side and in circles, and I yelled in panic, "What the hell?" My buddy gives a dismissive sigh, and when he looks where I'm pointing for 5 minutes, the UFO continues to move in very fluid movements, making impossible maneuvers, and doing so in complete silence. Without notice, this one object becomes 5 equally impressive star-like objects. They stayed close together. At times they moved in some sort of formation. The other times they seemed to move independently. Just as quick as the 5 came, they fused back together as one. We were in shock, but we didn't feel like we were in harm's way. We were recapping what we had just witnessed, but that single UFO was still there. It wasn't moving much. We thought things were coming to a close, but we were wrong. This time, the one object turned into at least 7. The thing, the way moved and jerked around, felt aggressive. My friend must have felt the same way, because he said he was starting to get nervous. I told him we should go, and I embarrassingly confessed that I knew it was there for us, and I became fearful. We haul out of there, and this thing follows us to the outskirts of town. The night after, me and the same buddy walked across to my apartment complex to go visit a neighbor that was about to grill some burgers. The sun was just starting to set on a humid midsummer afternoon. We knock on the door, and my neighbor lets us in. With him was his girlfriend, her sister, and some random guy that I didn't know. I go out back to chat with Ray, while he fires up the Kingsford. It's the two of us, so I take the opportunity to tell him about the previous night. The stars are just starting to come out, and in my storytelling I pointed one out just so Ray would know exactly what I meant. I'm still pretty much tripped out, so I'm fairly excited while describing everything. I'm almost done with my story, and I notice Ray looking at the stars that are just beginning to appear. I mean, this guy is looking around everywhere. It's like he became instantly paranoid. While I was in mid-sentence, Ray points to the northeast and yells, like that, right there. Holy crap. The goosebumps. He yelled inside for everyone to come out, so they did. And soon after, the same situation as mentioned above began to occur. That went on for a bit. It went on for so long that everyone but Ray and myself went inside. We ate our burgers while watching this, and behind Ray's apartment was a field. 300 yards away on the other side of the field is a tree line and a creek. On the other side of that tree line is another field. The object slowly descends towards the tree line, and I open the door and yell for everyone to come back out. We watch this huge, fiery orb in complete silence land on the other side of the tree line. When we lost direct sight of it, we could still see the light through the trees. Right before the light disappeared, it became very bright. We all kept asking each other if it was real. And this is the part where I may lose some of you. But after several minutes, at the end of all the sunlight, nothing was happening. Everyone was in and out the house. I remember standing in front of the back door talking to Ray's girlfriend in the kitchen. Ray, my buddy from the previous night, and the girlfriend's sister were outside. My buddy just goes, "Oh crap," under his breath and darts past me. The sister is right behind him. Ray shoves me into the door and almost falls on top of me. The girlfriend screams, slams the door shut and locks it. We all back away from the door. After our collective "what the hell was that?" we decided it was 4 legs covered in brown fur and trying to attack us. This apartment was a townhouse. We all went upstairs to get a better look, and there it was in the shadows. It was pacing around and keeping an eye on us. This is when they appeared. They came out of the darkness. They were short, about 3 feet. The skin tone was greyish with a bit of Caucasian colour. They were sort of greys. There were several of them. Meanwhile, the animal thing starts climbing a utility pole. This isn't your standard utility pole. It has 6 to 8 transformers on it and is H-shaped and kind of low. When the beast starts to climb, I watch it change to a degree. It decides to perch on one of those crossbeams and look right at us, but its focus seemed to be on the other creatures. It acted like a guard dog, for lack of better words. The greys were clothed but had some sort of instruments. They seemed preoccupied by the field. They would look at us on occasion, but they were doing something else. What exactly, I don't know. This went on for hours. Eventually we all went back down the stairs, and every once in a while I would go to check to see if they were gone. As soon as it was all clear, I ran home. That was it. For the next 4 years I pretty much believed it was random. And then after meeting my biological father for the first time, my now ex-wife jokingly brings up my UFO stories over dinner and wine. And that's a whole nother can of worms I don't want to get into now. Back during high school, I had insomnia, so most nights I would occupy my time by playing video games or browsing the web, but usually I would try and lay in bed to get to sleep, while progressively getting more frustrated. I will mention here that my bedroom was separate from the rest of the house. It was actually an under-house storage area that was a single large room with 2 big glass sliding doors and a sheet pinned up for my privacy. Now this particular night, I get the usual feeling it's going to be a long and frustrating night. I'm wide awake, so I start to plan out my school assignments just after 11 p.m. to pass the time while sitting on my bed doing so. It is here that my memory of the night before the events stops. Next thing I remember is waking up groggily and slowly on a flat stainless steel looking table like a surgical slab, naked. I look to my left and there's a blonde girl about my age laying on an identical table next to me, also naked, with 2 beings standing at the foot of the table monitoring her. I was slowly regaining my senses and taking in details around me, like how the room was really bright, but there was no clear light source. The walls were white and had shelves of tools and utensils, a single door at the end of the room. The beings were taller than the average human and thinner. They were wearing what I could describe as a mix between a white lab coat and a blue medical scrub, as well as a face mask. Their eyes and hands were the only true features I could actually see. Their eyes were big and almost almond-shaped, but nowhere near as exaggerated as the commonly depicted grey alien. Their hands were withered and had long fingers, pale in colour. It was only after a few seconds I regained consciousness that the 2 beings were alerted to me waking. At this moment, one of them rushed to my right side and the other moved to my left, while a third, who appeared to be their superior, walked through the door and at the end of the room to the foot of the table I was laying on. It turned to face the one on the left and spoke something that I couldn't understand, not only because it was in another language, but my hearing was muffled. I looked over to the one on my left, and it had grabbed a syringe-like device and was moving closer towards me, and I blacked out. Next thing I knew, I sat up as quickly as I could in a cold sweat, heart racing and in bed with my assignment work on my desk. I looked at the clock and it was just before 4 a.m. I turned the light on and checked my arm, and there were no bruises or scarring, but I wrote down as much as I could before I forgot. I retold this story to a select few people that I trusted for a few weeks, and one of them asked, "If there were no marks on your arm, what about your side?" Not expecting to see anything, I pointed to a place on my side next to where my elbow falls, saying, "Then there should be something around here." I lifted up my shirt and found a small scar about half an inch in length right between 2 ribs. Needless to say, we flipped out and proceeded to poke around with it for the next hour. My wife and I live in the Seattle area. Since the climate is colder here, centralized air conditioning is a luxury reserved for the wealthy. The rest of us have to sweat it out in the summer when it gets hot. We were living in a triplex apartment on the 2nd floor, and it got baked by the sun all day, so it would be uncomfortably hot well into the night, and we usually had all the windows open and fans blasting. We felt safe sleeping with the windows open, on account of being the 2nd floor. The really weird thing happened in the summer of 2013, during one of the hottest weeks of the year. I was up late, as was my habit, playing video games or something, when I went to bed around 1 a.m. I walked into our bedroom and started crawling into bed when I noticed a shining orb just chilling right outside our open window. It was just hovering there, bobbing up and down like a ball does when it hits water. I hadn't been drinking, and I'd never done any hallucinogenic drugs, so I was convinced what I was seeing was real. All of a sudden, the orb kind of turns, and I see what looks like a camera aperture facing me, almost like the eyeball thing that comes out of the door of Jabba's place when Luke goes to rescue Han. Then it flashes at me several times. Just as soon as it appears, I watch it zip off. When I stuck my head out the window to see where it went, it was gone. I was seriously freaked out, but I was also exhausted from the heat, so I just went to bed. But I've never told anyone except my wife about this, and she believed me, but didn't seem as disturbed by the occurrence as I was. This was pretty early in the era of consumer drones, and they weren't that advanced at that point. My best guess was that it was some kind of secret government surveillance tool. If that is the case, some CIA agent somewhere has a few pictures of me looking very dumbfounded in my underwear. Anyone else ever see anything like this, or know what it was? Perhaps it was that, or maybe something otherworldly. Back in 2001, my family, grandparents, uncle, my parents all lived on a ranch south of Oregon by some big hills. This all happened at night when my brother Bob, who was 12, was playing on the old classic PS2, when my brother said something to him to look to the stars, and he did. He walked over and looked. When he did, he said there was a star that looked to be at the same height as a 747 flies, when it started flashing and shot down towards our backyard. He saw a disc that looked like it was going to land on its side. He later guessed it flies belly first, but when it landed, things got strange. A little background: we had a basement which you could get into from the side very easily, but the door going in and out of the house was locked up tight. My brother and I shared a room next to that door anyway. My brother said he didn't know how they got out of the ship, but when they did, they were tall, skinny, and had a look of pure anger on their faces. As they walked closer to the house, my brother ran to grab me off the top bunk and hid me under a pile of random stuff, and I guess I passed out. The thing at this point was looking into the room, and my brother freaked out and was scared. Understandably so, but I assume we all lost time somewhere, and my dad shows up asking what's going on. Bob explained what happened. Then my dad asked, "Where is your brother?" And my brother said, "I hid him." But my dad freaked out because he thought he had hit me. My dad later told us that it was weird because the basement door was wide open and the ground where that thing landed was dead for years. I don't know what happened, if they took me or my brother, but ever since, life has been just a bit more strange. My brother still dreams of them, like they're trying to tell him something. Just a few days ago, he told me he had a dream where the TV is static with a symbol on it, and then standing in the closet looking at him. His wife said this TV static was a real thing, and then it turned itself off. The other is my personal experience. I had borrowed my mum's phone when mine was broken, and it was around 2 a.m. So I snuck into her room to put it on the charger. When I looked over, I see this dark, skinny shadow with long, pointy fingers seemingly sitting up out of my father, looking straight ahead. When it snapped its head towards me, and I ran like a girl. Now, I know you may be thinking that it was a ghost or demon, but when I told my brother the story, he was like, "You just described what came out of that ship that night." I live in North San Diego County, and with the heavy military presence in the environs, sightings of a UFO is a pretty common phenomenon. That said, my wife and I saw a UFO. We still talk about it due to not understanding what exactly we witnessed. We had just put our 2 children to bed, and were outside during the summer, just sitting and taking in the night. a light in the sky to the east of us. We live near the ocean, and inland is mainly mountainous desert, so the further you go yonder appeared static and in place. It didn't move, it hovered. We couldn't tell how far away it was. Sometimes it appeared to be off in the distance, and the next instant it appeared to be clearly closer. We both remarked of the properties of whatever we were seeing. After a minute or so, the light, which, here therefore, could have been a trick of the eyes, and an aircraft or some sort, did impossible moves in the air. It moved faster than any aircraft I've ever seen or heard. It moved at angles, while at speed that I know to be impossible given the current state of our technology, and it didn't observe the same concepts of time. For example, as we watched it, it went from a staticky light in the sky to one that seemed to catch on to our wonder about it, and it sped towards us, seemingly fixated on our wonder, passed us and was gone. We were both spooked, and my wife and I remarked that we had just seen something pretty incredible in the original sense of the word. I concurred. Not a report of the occurrence the next day in the press, so that we began to wonder if we'd just succumbed to a joint hallucination based on whatever. I've spoken the truth here. Neither my wife or I is especially gullible, though I, for one, have my shameful moments of such. Each of us is at a loss to what we witnessed, but we are cool with having witnessed whatever it was that we saw. My friend told me this story a while ago, and at first I didn't believe him, but something about the way he said it, and the look in his eyes, and the tone of his voice still haunts me. He was on a date with his girlfriend at the time. This was in middle school, and they had just gotten some food and were walking around the neighborhood. They started to walk, and they approached this house that we called the Crazy House, because it had a bunch of garbage. When they looked up the street and saw this car stop while mid-right turn, as if they were stopping to let someone cross the street, but they didn't see anyone. Finally, they saw a man wave his hands towards the driver as to say thank you, and he was wearing a tall, black trench coat and an umbrella and a monocle. The second time was on the same day. They were walking around roughly the same place but on a court and on through the street. They turned the corner and saw him again at the end of the court. Mind you, there would have been no possible way for him to be there without them seeing it. There were only two entrances to the court, both in range of sight. I know this because he showed me the area the day after with a really freaked out look on his face. Now here's the scary part. The man walked up to them and walked past them, stopped, closed his umbrella, turned around and stared at them in the eyes and walked away. They've both seen him after that in different towns and different homes. They've seen him playing cards on the ground with his face on it, and so forth. Then again, I don't completely believe him, but there were two people present at the time, and both are super sensitive about the topic. Plus, the way he tells it is like Aware story time 10. His eyes get super wide and freaked out, his heart rate goes all up, and we refer to him as that one dude with the black umbrella. I don't really know what it could have been. I'm open to hearing anyone's possible explanations. This happened in around 1996 when I was 8 years old. It was getting dark out, but the sky wasn't totally black, like a deep blue. You could make out the clouds fairly easily, and there weren't many stars yet. We had a large sunroom with lots of big windows, and I was sitting on the floor playing with Lego. Occasionally, I'd get up and walk around or just move around because little kids can't sit still and don't keep their attention very well. I had gotten up for a third or fourth time when something outside caught my attention. It was up in the sky, but like I said earlier, it wasn't dark out yet. I could make out a shape, like a large triangle with rounded sides. It wasn't moving very quickly, and didn't seem to be making any noise, other than a faint glow and low rumbling. It was more of a sensation than anything. There were pink lights at the three corners that were flickering in a sequence: left, top, right, top, left, right. There was one light in the middle that faded out slowly, and was very, very bright white. It would seem pretty odd for a plane to have lights like that, or for one to be shaped like this. I watched for a good 10 to 15 seconds before it completely vanished. It didn't fly away or move or anything. It was like hiding a layer in Photoshop, just completely gone. I had ran and told my mother, and I don't know if she was humoring me or actually believed me, but she came out and looked up into the sky with me, and of course, there was nothing there. Other than a few stories like this from when I was younger, I hadn't seen anything notable in the skies recently. When I was 10 and my sister 8, we were planning on sleeping out on a second-story balcony one summer night, and we were out there on our sleeping bags. It was around 7 or 8 at night, so not dark yet, when suddenly all of the neighborhood sounds like cars, dogs, people, birds, etc. went totally silent for about 30 seconds. We noticed and was like, well, that was weird. We even both mentioned having a creepy sensation befall us, but we stayed out there anyway. About 2 to 3 minutes later, a rounded triangular something that was about the size of a dinner table essentially dropped into the area about 10 feet directly above us. I'm not saying it was a UFO, but it looked for all the world like a UFO. It was metallic, and there were lights and windows. It hovered for a few seconds and then zipped up and away. We freaked out and ran inside. This was in the 90s, so if it was a drone, this was way ahead of its time. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. So what did you think of these stories? Has it maybe pushed you slightly more or against belief in aliens? I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. I personally, I think they're real. I don't know if they've made contact with Earth, but it certainly adds a lot of mystery, and it poses even more questions than before. I'm not entirely sure, but I would love to hear your thoughts about this down below in the comments. I would also like to thank my members and patrons whose names are on screen for helping financially with the running of the channel. It really means a lot and helps out a bunch. So thank you guys. Thank you. That's all from me tonight. I should be seeing you again soon. So until then, stay awesome. If you want to watch something else, link on screen now. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.